I'm not saying Pete's a wino, but oh wait, sorry.
Welcome to the Lovecraftian podcast. This is January the 28th, 2018. We just lost Pete. Hopefully he'll be back. Before we do introductions like we usually do, we want to apologize to Ross Lockhart because he was scheduled to be on the show last week and was on briefly. And, I don't really want to talk about what happened after that. So.
It was grim. It was grim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any theories? Anyone?
I'm being punished for your sins.
Well,
guys, I just want to jump in and say, hey, thanks for having me on, because I was really excited last week to see Ross on the show, he's my publisher. He's a great guy, and man, I don't know what that was. There was all that, and behind him, and
Let me
and then
ask.
after that, God, poor Rick Lay. It just what was that all about?
Has anyone heard from Ross since?
That's a good point.
I got like a really incoherent email. That's I didn't make any sense to me.
Cryptic.
Something about Eternal Frankenstein. I didn't get it.
Maybe that was it. Maybe it was some kind of Eternal Frankenstein thing, but I don't know. I'm a little worried about him, quite frankly. No sign of Rick. Joe Pulver is just, what?
Right.
He was doing so well
on the show today, and that's not happening.
Yeah. That's just that. The whole thing with Joe, my God, and Kat won't stop crying about it. Geez, whatever.
Sorry. Oh man, I couldn't keep a straight face. Anyway, just in case Ross is alive, he runs a publishing company called Word Horde, and I'm sorry we didn't get to talk to Ross for very long, and if it was only the live viewers who saw even that, but he's got some great books that he's published. Go to wordhorde.com. That's wordhorde.com, wordhorde.com/catalog, and you'll see a list of those books. And he's got a new book out called Eternal Frankenstein, which is not on that page yet, I noticed. But if you go to that site and hover over books and then anthologies, you'll see it. So, check out Word Horde books. And John Langan's our guest today. He's published one of your books as well, right, John?
He has, yeah. My most recent novel, The Fisherman. Thank you, Ross. As I never tire of saying, all the major publishers passed on it, and I sent it to Ross, honestly, just because I was bummed out. And, Ross and I go back from when he was working at Nightshade, and they published my first novel. And so I sent him a copy of the book just to tell me, is this any good? And within hours, he emailed me back and he said, I want to publish this. And it's been really about as good an experience as I could wish for from a publisher. I really recommend him.
It's a wonderful book too. Everyone who passed on it made a mistake. Let's do quick introductions and then resume talking with John. I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraftian. Pete, are you there? I'll take that as a no. Matt?
What happened to Pete?
Hi, Matt Carpenter. I do stuff sometimes.
That's great.
Chilling.
Yeah. Philip?
Philip Fracassi, author and screenwriter.
All right, that's everybody. Sorry, Kelly? Sorry, I always forget Kelly.
Kelly Young, executive editor, Strange Eons magazine.
All right. Well, I'm missing Joe. He was going to help me interview John today, but I'll struggle just with you guys. So, John, for those out there who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do for a living, and I know you teach creative writing for one thing.
Yeah, my day job, I guess, I'm an adjunct professor at the State University of New York at New Paltz, which is about 90 minutes north of New York City along the Hudson, and in kind of the foothills of the Catskills. And I teach creative writing, usually the intro to creative writing classes. I teach kind of intro to literature classes, so classes in the novel, classes in the short story, kind of whatever they need for their general education requirements. So I do that. What else? I study karate. I have a black belt in a Korean form of karate called Tung Soo Do, and I teach that a little bit at the two studios that my school runs. And I'm the parent of a 27-year-old and of a 14-and-a-half-year-old. The 27-year-old is a cop down in Lancaster with 4 lovely children. And the 14-and-a-half-year-old has discovered the electric guitar and goes
Nice.
he goes to a place called the Rock Academy, which is up by Woodstock. And he just got done playing an AC/DC show. So all those AC/DC tunes I was too cool for when I was a kid. Now I know every single one of them, line by line. I think Black Sabbath is up next. My wife and I have 5 dogs, 3 cats. I don't know how many fish, a hermit crab. She has a horse who's a kind of a jerk. And
That horse is an asshole.
yeah, he's not really, he's not the kind of horse you could call like a rogue horse. He's just kind of just a jerk.
I've never heard anybody describe a horse as a jerk before. That's great.
Yeah, it's the word that fits, man. It just totally fits. And
He's not a jacket.
what else? I write fiction. I've been reviewing horror and dark fantasy for Locust magazine for about the last it's about the last year and a half now. I took over Laird Barron's old gig there, and I think that's probably it. There's probably something I'm forgetting that's like blatantly obvious, but to start with, that's a little bit about me.
Well, as far as the creative writing teaching, how has that affected how you write at all?
No, I think it's more the other way around, honestly. I went into teaching creative writing. Honestly, look, it's the weird thing about teaching at the college level is that you have minimal training. If you want to be a high school teacher, at least in New York State, if you want to be a high school teacher, you have to be an education major. You have to take all kinds of classes in how to teach and how to, adolescent or pre-adolescent psychology and what have you. In college, there's just kind of this assumption that if you do it, you can teach it. If you have a PhD, you can teach it, or if you're published, you can teach. And then there's a little bit of training. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but comparatively speaking, there isn't that much. And so when I went into teaching creative writing, I had this idea of sort of a lot of received wisdom that kids get about creative writing. Show, don't tell, and slaughter your darlings, and write about, only what you know, and all these other kinds of bad cliches, which when I was an undergraduate, I had to deal with in the couple of creative writing classes I took. But honestly, when I was an undergrad, I wanted to be a creative writing major, but the guy who ran the program at the time was dead set against anything that wasn't the most restricted kind of realism, and not even realism, therefore, really, but the sorts of coming of age stories that focused on your first sexual experience and how disappointing it was. And I just wasn't, I always regretted that. I always felt bad about that. And I thought, if I ever get in a position where I can teach creative writing, I'm going to try really hard to be open to the kids who want to write about, their disappointing first sexual experience, but also the kids who want to write about Clive Barker's stuff the way I did when I was a kid. So I've tried to be expansive, and that's kind of my, I guess it's kind of my approach to a lot of things. It's kind of my approach to my own fiction as well, and my own reading. And so I try as much as possible to be open to what the kids want to do, to try to ask them to do certain things. So, I have to cover poetry because it's an introductory class. And I love poetry, but I'm not a particularly gifted poet. So we write a lot of formal poetry. Oh, here's a haiku, here's a sonnet, because there are things you can, sort of structures you can introduce them to. And then when it comes to writing fiction, a lot of what I try to do is give them, when I can, the benefit of my experience, but without wanting to be one of those teachers who's like, go buy my book. I hate those guys. I really, really hate those teachers. We've all heard about them anyway, and I just think that really turns students off. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I approach it.
Let's talk about your fiction. How many books have you published so far? House of Windows, was that the first book?
No, actually, my first book was a collection of stories called Mr. Gaunt and Other Uneasy Encounters, which came about almost by accident. I was working on my first novel at that point. Visual aids by the beautiful and talented Philip Fracassi.
Yes.
You can win a date with him. Find out, people. You have to watch till the end of the episode, okay? Look, I'm just trying to help, Mike. I'm trying to do whatever I can to get viewers, okay?
That's
Phil's
right.
a good looking. All right?
That's not the way to do it. Let's tell you right now.
No, that's it. He'll take you to the Tigers, the Tigers hat? I don't even know.
That's pretty much Spooner. I told Fracassi he's going to be big time someday, and I just hope he remembers us little people when he gets there. So.
No, he will remember us because we'll have the video. It's, I got an email actually almost simultaneously. I got emails from Nick Mamatas, who were had connections. I had a contact at Prime Books, and they were looking for a new collection in their sort of publishing slot. And both Paul and Nick emailed me and said, "Hey, do you have enough stories for this?" And barely I did. I had 4 published stories, and I had this 30,000-word novella that I hadn't been able to place anywhere. And I was like, oh, there you go. So my first collection came out. That was not what I was planning on. I was planning to try and publish a novel first. It came out. It did reasonably well. It got some lovely, very generous reviews. I think it was nominated for a Stoker Award for what that's worth. And yeah, just generally received very kind notices from people. And then about a year after that, House of Windows came out. My first novel shopped around, as was my second novel, shopped around to all the major sort of New York publishers. And the genre publisher said, this is too literary, and the literary publisher said, this is too genre. And I actually wound up pitching the novel to Jeremy, I guess it was Jeremy Lassen of Nightshade Books at World Fantasy Convention, maybe 2007, 2008. It was in Saratoga Springs, and I was there. And we were just standing around talking, and I think he may have even asked me, do you have a novel? And I said, yeah, and I gave him the pitch, and he said, have your agent send it to me. And they took it and really stuck with it. It was it's a weird book in that it got amazingly good reviews. It's just like these long, in-depth reviews, and then every now and again I'll get an email from somebody who says, "I love that book," and I get this long email. But commercially, it was not exactly a resounding success. So a couple of years later, Paul Tremblay and I co-edited a book of monster stories called Creatures, 30 Years of Monsters. I had always wanted to do this monster book, and I thought that it would be cool to do a book, actually to do a couple of anthologies, to be honest, that would sort of fill in the gap between the end of Stephen King's Danse Macabre, which covered horror fiction up to 1980, and say about 2010. And so I thought that it would be cool to do a book of monster stories. It would be cool to do a book of non-monster stories, non-supernatural stories. So Paul and I did Creatures, and we got to work with Clive Barker. We got to work with China Mieville. We couldn't offer anybody very much money. which was a shame. But all these writers, David Scout, Kelly Link, were really gracious with letting us reprint their stuff. We wanted to do a follow-up. We could never come up with a good title for it. We thought maybe Psychos, but then that didn't sound quite right. And I think somebody later used that title, actually. But yeah, then after that was I started publishing a lot more stories. I was in the process, I guess, of publishing more stories. So my second collection, The White Carnivorous Sky, came out in 2013. And then The Fisherman, my most recent novel, came out in 2016. And despite a blurb from Pete Rawlik, it did pretty well. And and hopefully this year, hopefully later, in a few months, my next collection, my third collection, which is called Saphira and Other Betrayals, will be out from Hippocampus Press. There's two original pieces in that, and I've been laboring over both of them for what seems like an eternity now. Every now and again, either my publisher or myself gets an email from somebody saying, how about that book? And I know, I want to say, I'm so sorry. It's coming. I promise you it's coming. But there's a novella and a piece that I'm trying to keep to a novelette that I'm trying to finish up for it. So hopefully, we already have the cover artwork from Santiago Caruso, the brilliant Argentinian artist who did the cover for my last collection, and so hopefully it'll be out, late winter, early springtime.
House of Windows was just re-released too, right?
That's true. It was. Yeah, I had gone to. I was invited a couple of years ago to 3 years ago, I guess it was. Christopher Golden was doing an event local to him in Haverhill, Massachusetts. At I'm trying to think. He had it originally at a little theater company, who were in a converted or repurposed, I guess, industrial park. And while I was there, I met Jamie Levine, who was taking on the role of publisher at this new publishing company or publishing imprint called Diversion Books. And I brought some copies of House of Windows to give away. So I gave her a copy, and a couple of days later, she emailed me and she said, "I love this. I want to reprint it. I think it would, fit in well with what we're trying to do." So yeah, we got Adam Neville very graciously agreed to write an introduction for the book, and I wrote some additional material, reading guide and a little essay on how the book came to be and such. And I started to write what was going to be a sort of a sequel story, or at least a story set in the same house. But that grew into another novella. So at some point that will get finished too. And I'm not sure whether I might see if Diversion will bring that out as some kind of, as it were, like a Kindle single, that kind of thing. But that's kind of on the back burner at the moment as I try to get the next collection done.
Yeah, it says in Amazon said the introduction by Adam Neville and including a reading group guide. What you touched on that briefly a minute ago, but what's that all about? The reading group guide.
It's part of it is it's just it's trying to generate more interest in the book, right? So there's an essay by me in the back of it that explains how the book came to be. There were questions for if you have the book in your reading group. There were questions that you can ask each other afterwards, and then suggestions for further reading, which is like 10 books or something. It's not a particularly deep list. Things I want to say The Shining's probably on there. It's funny, I can't actually remember what I put on that list now, but I'm sure there's some Dickens on there because the novel concerns Dickens or a Dickens scholar.
I can tell you, John, what's on there. Great Expectations, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Hunting at Phil House, Jolly Corner, Our Lady of Darkness by Lieber, and Ghost Story and Lost Boy, Lost Girl by Straub.
Nice. That's a good list. Okay. Yeah.
See, Philip is not just a pretty face,
No, I've got some tools.
He is a pretty face, and he has the tools, if you know what I mean.
Without spoilers,
no,
obviously.
I don't know what you mean. Would you explain?
I actually have Mike, may I interject
Yes,
a quick
please
question?
cut in at any time, you guys. Go right ahead.
I want to talk about, because I want to talk about a little kernel of frustration, John, because after you and I last saw each other, I went and tried to buy Creatures, and it's not available, and I want to know if it's going to become available again.
Is there not? I thought it was available through ebook. Is there not an ebook edition?
That might be. I'm a print guy.
No, actually, talk to me after. Don't talk to me. I'll set you up, Phil. Don't worry.
Let's see. Let's see what's what. All right. It would be.
We just lost your audio there, buddy. There you go. You're back.
Oh.
I just looked it up on Amazon, and
it's a lie.
It says 6 left in stock.
Yeah, I know. I tried to order, and then like 3 months later, maybe 3 weeks later, I got an email saying, we cannot fulfill your request. So, but maybe, maybe something's changed. I'll try and order it again and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, just hang on. Send me an email. Talk to me. I'll help you out, Phil. Don't worry. Talk to me.
Well, for those who like Kindle, it is available on Kindle. So
you can buy used copies.
Yeah, they're expensive.
Are they really? That's awesome. I mean, I don't see any of that. I just think it's really cool if it became a book that people really liked, because it didn't. Again, Paul and I mean, we labored over that sucker, and we spent a lot of time reading stories and trying to figure out, what the right level of contents would be and such. And I guess it's a lesson in patience, right? For anybody we all know this, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a book of your fiction or a critical book or an anthology. Patience is the name of the game. There are plenty of books I have that I've bought that are still sitting by my bedside or on my bookshelves or whatever, and I fully intend to get to them. But so yeah, I'm pleased to think that people might be sort of catching up to Creatures, as it were. We had a couple of original stories in there, one by Carrie Laban and one by Nadia Balkin. And they're terrific stories. They're terrific original stories. The other stories are great too, but I always felt a little bad that both Carrie and Nadia didn't get a little bit more press for those stories.
Nadia is such a wonderful writer.
Yeah, her new book, which actually does include that story, Absolute Zero. Her new book, man, it's a powerful debut. I feel like this past year, honestly, you had Christy DeMeester's debut, and you had Gwendolyn Keist's debut as well. There were some real powerhouse starts. A number of writers. With reviewing for Locust, I find it's all I can do to just get this sort of tip of the iceberg of what's being published right now.
Without spoilers, obviously, and I want to get to Locust in a minute here. Without spoilers, can you tell the audience what House of Windows is about? Little synopsis.
It's about a man who can't be haunted by the ghost of his son. It's told from the point of view of a young woman who has an affair with and then marries her much older professor. And as a result of the breakup of his first marriage, his adult son pays him a very angry visit, which ends in a lot of violence between the two of them. And at the end of that violence, the father, in essence, disowns his son in this very sort of florid and theatrical kind of way. The son is a member of the Special Forces, and after the September 11th attacks, he deploys to Afghanistan, where he's subsequently killed. And this, of course, is a devastating blow to the father. And he and his wife, his second wife, the narrator, have moved into the house that he and his first wife owned. This big Queen Anne style house in the town of Huguenot, which bears no relation whatsoever to New Paltz, New York. And after they move in there, they begin to experience all sorts of strange occurrences, and it becomes clear that the son's ghost is reaching out to the father, maybe. But it's only the narrator who experiences it, and it seems in essence that the father has cut himself off from his son's ghost by cursing him in this way. And things get stranger and stranger as she starts to delve into the history of the house, and she starts to try to understand what the house is and why this is happening why this strange event is happening within this house. When I wrote the book, I said to my wife, I want this to be the book that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I'll be happy to leave this behind. I'll feel like, okay, this is, a monument, as it were. And I think, in some ways it does, like it did that for me. I also have said, though, that I think in some ways I wrote my second or third book first, because the narrator is not terribly likable. The situation, and her husband isn't, he's a man who did a kind of a rotten thing, disowning his son. And not to mention, having an affair with his student. And so I think that for a lot of people picking up a first novel, this was not necessarily what they were looking for. I think a novel like that, in retrospect, I say to myself, that probably should have been your second or third novel. It should have come at a time when you built up a little bit more trust with your audience, so that they would say, oh, well, this person doesn't seem that likable, but that's okay because I trust this guy. My second novel, The Fisherman, I've said in some ways I thought should have been the first novel, because that character is I hope, more likable figure, more relatable, as the kids say.
I really, really enjoyed The Fisherman. I know a lot of people did as well. Can you give a short synopsis of The Fisherman as well? What's that book about?
It's about a guy who's recounting this terrible thing that happened to him some years ago, and he wants to sort of sit down and finally get it out into the world. And it was an event that happened after he had started fishing. He started fishing after his wife died of cancer quite early on in their marriage, and he took up fishing as a kind of restorative activity. He started fishing with a friend whose family had been killed, whose young family had been killed in a terrible accident. Their friendship, their fishing led them all over the Catskills, seeking out new streams, what have you, including a stream that may be a haunted stream, that may be a place where if you go there, you can see your loved ones again, restored to you. And the middle of the book is taken up with a kind of short novel within the novel, which is about the history, or involves the history of the construction of the Ashokan Reservoir in the Catskills, but which is directly responsible for the appearance of this haunted stream. I guess that's probably about enough information, I suppose. Maybe too much.
So John, did you?
Are you a fisherman?
No, I did this question last year.
I am not a fisherman. I went a couple of times when I was a kid, and it didn't take. But my younger son is an avid fisherman, and so I had actually started writing the story. When I started, I guess I should back up and say that when I started writing horror fiction, I had this idea, because like all new writers, I was kind of afraid that I would run out of information or run out of stories to write. And so I thought I'll riff off, kind of classic American literature. And I thought I'd come to a point in my writing where I thought I'm going to riff off Moby Dick. I didn't want to write a whaling story because, I find whaling really reprehensible. But fishing seemed like it would be a good kind of analog. And so that was what really determined that the book was going to involve fishing in that way. And it so happened, as I was writing it, over the course of a few years that it took me to write it, that my younger son became this avid fisher. And then that he gave me, when I was finished with the book, I ran some stuff by him to make sure, well, would you fish here with worms, or would you use lures, or what kind of, would you really use a fly rod here? No, okay. Well, what kind of spin rod, spin cast or whatever. So yeah, he's credited as my technical advisor.
That's great. Well, let's talk about Locust. You've been writing reviews. What, you have something, Pete?
Shogun Reservoir. Did you know that Lovecraft had written about it, or was that just circumstance?
I did know that he had visited the area. My old college mentor and friend, Bob Waugh, had. It's funny, when I was a freshman in college, right, I first met Bob because he ran this thing. He still runs this thing here called the Lovecraft Symposium. Every year around Halloween, he brings together Lovecraft scholars and occasional creative writers to read whatever criticism they're working on about Lovecraft or fiction inspired by Lovecraft, that kind of stuff. And the reason that Bob started doing that was that someone had come to him and said, you have to do something about Lovecraft here. Lovecraft visited New Paltz. He visited the reservoir. He visited Kingston. In fact, I think it was in Kingston his telescope was stolen. He had a little telescope he used to spy out architectural peculiarities. And somebody stole it. So there's a story waiting to be written there, I think, about Lovecraft's telescope, But yeah, so I knew that there was the connection, and I have a private theory that Lovecraft's, that the reservoir in The Color Out of Space is the Ashokan Reservoir. Lots of people have said, no, it's the Quabbin Reservoir, and I don't make any argument in terms of the placing of the reservoir, but in terms of the inspiration for the reservoir. When he saw the Ashokan Reservoir, it was a newly created thing in a newly flooded area. I can't help but think that had some kind of impact on it.
Well, it did have an impact.
But,
it's not The Color Out of Space that he writes about it. It's The Lurking Fear.
Yeah. I mean, you have that with the degenerate Dutch and what have you. Yeah.
All those displaced settlers that he's talking about are the guys who were working on the reservoir and whose homes were flooded out when they finally opened up the gates.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah.
Pete, you better get on that telescope story.
Because I just have so much free time.
Well, that's right up your alley, though. So.
It is. That should have been who was it that wrote that Lovecraft's Pillow book? Was a woman.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's what we should do. We should have a contest. Let's, in a year, everybody has to have produced a Lovecraft's telescope story. You've got 1 year to come up with something.
All right.
Wasn't it Fagg, Ken Fagg?
No, I think it's a woman.
Lovecraft's Pillow was that's the name of his book from Hippocampus, I think.
I don't know.
Let me look it up. I mean, if only we had this thing called the internet.
If only there was some sort of way to look things up, some sort of system.
Only would stop correcting my stuff.
Well, while you're looking that up, let's talk about Locust, John. You've been reviewing books for them for the last, year and a half or so?
Yeah, they had brought, they had reached out to Laird Barron and they brought him on board because they were looking to cover, for more expansive horror coverage. Stefan Zemianowicz has been covering horror for them. I guess about every other issue, maybe every third issue sometimes. But it's not enough. And Stefan tends to focus on the big guns. So when Stephen King has a new novel out, or Clive Barker or whatever, Anne Rice, Stefan reviews it. And so they brought Laird in to broaden what they were doing. And then Laird, with working on what would become his crime novels, it just became too much, and so he stepped down. And I once again, I sort of talked to Paul Tremblay, who had some contacts, and he said, "Yeah, you should throw your hat in the ring." So I did, and they said, "Okay," and here we are. It's been a year and a half, and most months I try to get something in there, depending on what my own creative writing schedule is like, and also just what my health is like. Last year I was diagnosed with diabetes, and that whole months that I just sort of lost with not feeling well and trying to get that under control. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
you know, it was in a way it was kind of good. Because I had felt really bad for a long time, and I just sort of thought, well, you're just old. I'm just getting old, and it's just, you know, very sort of almost puritanical view of things, you know. And then when my doctor was like, no, you've got diabetes, and we can do things about it, I was like, oh, imagine that. So little did I know that it would result in, you know, the loss of all the chocolate I love to eat, whatever. So, you know, there's a price to pay, but so yeah, so the reason I mention this mostly is that my reviewing philosophy is I only review things I like. I have no interest in trashing anybody.
I feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, life is far too short, and I've just got and the amount of space that it would take me to trash somebody's novel, story collection, anthology, what have you. That space I could be dedicating, and I do dedicate to something I like, something that deserves attention. But even then, even with that as my my kind of guiding vision, I guess, for the reviews, I still can't get to everything. There's so much good stuff out there, and so. And there's a time limit, you know, there's a time limit when something, if I can't get to something within about 6 months of its publication date, I just have to move on and just say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get to that. So, so yeah, with being sick in the middle part of the year, last year, there were things, you know, Justin Steele and Sam Cohen's Looming Low that I don't think I'm going to get to. I did a year-end, sort of a year in review write-up for them, and I mentioned it there. But that seemed to me one of the major books last year. There's a lot. There's so much that you could say about that book, actually, for the way that it's a showcase of, you know, what would you call it? Sort of a newer group of writers. You know, people like Nadia Balkin and Mike Griffin, say, and Christy DeMeester, and people who are slightly more established, people like S.P. Miskowski. And then it brings in people who've been doing it for a little while, like Jeff Thomas and Gemma Files. And it sort of shows them in Gemma and Jeff, it sort of shows them almost in a new relation, in a new light to these writers who are writing now. You know, Gary Wolfe has this, I think it's Gary anyway, who has this saying that every anthology is an argument. And I think in that sense, if it's trying to make a point or advance a certain viewpoint, I guess, I think there's some truth to that. And so I think the viewpoint that Looming Low advances is that, wow, things are just, you know, things are going in really interesting direction. Whether you call it horror fiction or weird fiction or whatever, it's branching out in these really interesting directions. And it's been a strong few years for anthologies. Joe Pulver had two of them this past year. He had the Walk on the Weird Side, which you know was coincided with the this past Necronomicon Providence, and which in a lot of ways, I really thought that Walk on the Weird Side, you could almost read that as a kind of companion volume to Looming Low, if you wanted. If you wanted a kind of state of the younger field in a lot of ways, or the newer field, or however you want to put that, those two books offer a terrific survey. And then Joe's he co-edited the Ramsey Campbell tribute, Darker Companions, and which was one of two Campbell tribute anthologies out last year. The other one was Children of Glocky, that Brian Sammons and Glenn Owen Barris did. And you know, which were it was great to see Ramsey getting that kind of attention. I'm all I know that people have expressed their reservations about different, you know, tribute volumes to individual writers, especially if those writers are alive. But I think they're great. I think it's a terrific idea. Why do we have to wait till these guys are dead? Why don't we just Ramsey's been doing great work. Why shouldn't he get that? Why shouldn't he get that recognition?
Yeah, why wait to say nice things and do nice things for people that you appreciate when they no longer can know about it because they've passed on?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think I would love to see. I think there were an abundance of writers whose work could support such an anthology. Obviously there's King and Straub, but Thomas Tessier. I was thinking about him the other day, who was a terrific. He wrote one of my favorite werewolf novels, The Nightwalker, which. Man, I don't know. I was thinking the other day about books I've reread a number of times, and that may be, oddly enough, like I sort of thought, man, you've reread the Nightwalker maybe more than any other novel, which kind of surprised me because I would have said it was like Ghost Story or something like that. But Tom Tessier writes these really slender books. They're a couple of 100 pages long, so he was very much out of the or running on his own course. He was not part of that King Straub. Barker, to a certain extent, McCammon trend of these giant horror novels, but instead he was writing these short, kind of grim and yet also elegant novels. So yeah, there's just so many different writers that you could pay tribute to, and that just seems to me an eminently worthy thing to do. I love the Lovecraft anthologies, and I'm happy that people find stuff in Lovecraft's fiction to respond, continue to respond to. I just think there's room for more.
Absolutely. What are you want to talk about? A few highlights from the past year and a half, books you reviewed, or the authors?
Yeah, I mean, all right. So look, the first thing. That Fracassi book, what was it? Behold the Void. Oh my God, what a disaster that was! I'm telling you,
what happened to no bad reviews? What the hell?
That's only if the book really just isn't really crap.
No, John's like, hold on, I didn't put it in the magazine, but I do have that review right here. Let me break it out.
It's gonna make an exception for you, Phil.
Yeah,
Public service now.
It's yeah, no, it was. Yeah, but that's the thing, right? Is Phil's book was one of just this, a number of amazing collections that have been published, and I think, what I actually liked about Behold the Void, was that it wasn't all like was the variety of it, was the diversity of it, was that you've got stories in there that read like, I mean, my favorite probably was Alter. Which could be in a lot of ways just this kind of almost Stephen King-esque sort of slice of life. Here's some kids at a pool, but something's going wrong. There's a crack in the pool, and so you think that it's just going to head in this direction of almost a sort of naturalistic disaster story, and without giving too much away, it just goes to this utterly insane place that it just ends with this astonishing image, and which is. I took it as a parent, I guess, very much this image for all our dread and all our fears about what's going to happen to our kids as they grow older and as they go out into the world, and there's this fear we have, right, about what the world is going to do to them. I just thought it was that alone was worth the price of admission, and then you have all these other kind of crazy stories, and the same thing is true. If you look at, say Nadia Balkan's collection, She Said Destroy, where you have these stories, some of which are, I guess we call them political horror stories. I'm not really sure exactly why they're set. I guess they engage politics in a kind of self-conscious way, but which are in some cases just utterly devastating. And then S.P. Miskowski. Miskowski had a crazy year last year because, she released her novel I Wish I Was Like You, which for me was one of the novels of the year. It's a short novel, but it's a posthumous narrative. It's a posthumous narrative that begins with writing advice. Never write a posthumous narrative, and then flouts that writing advice. And it's just a brilliant. Scary ghost story. Miskowski I read, or I think I read somewhere, her saying that she wanted to write a novel that would take one of those ghosts that you run into in Japanese horror films, these sorts of vengeful ghosts that are just looking to destroy everything they come into contact with. That would sort of look at how do you create one of those? How does one of those come to be? And the novel just does that brilliantly. And then you also had her collection of stories. Which was released. The novel was earlier in the year. The collection of stories was later in the year. Blanking on the name of her collection of stories now. What was it? Quickly to the internet, somebody. Oh my God! This is even. All right, never mind. But
Strange as the Night. Strange as the Night. Is that what it was? It's kind of a
Strange as the Night. Was that it? Or was that a song?
Wait, no, that's Billy Joel. Yeah, Strange as the Night. Yeah, I nailed it.
Okay, yeah. So she had this banner year. Gwendolyn Keist had her first story collection, And Her Smile Will Untether the Universe, also at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year had a novella, Pretty Marys All in a Row, which is a really neat kind of like cross between, it's sort of like Neil Gaiman meets Angela Carter, about all these kind of quasi-mythic figures who are all ghosts, and they're all united by being named Mary, Mary quite contrary, or Miss Mary Mac, all dressed in black, and all of these sort of quasi-archetypes live in a house together, and they have to go out every night and haunt and come back and bring the fear back that they've evoked in people to dine on, and then things get weird.
I haven't read that one yet, but I really, really enjoyed the first one, And Her Smile Will Untether the Universe. We had Gwendolyn on and talked about that. That was fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah,
collection.
No, she's really got some chops, man, and also Christy DeMeester this past year, had her first novel Beneath, which is this kind of Appalachian monster in the soil novel, and then also had her first collection as well. So right there, you had a number of writers making. Miskowski, you can't say Miskowski was making a debut because she already had, I want to say, one collection and the Skaloot cycle of novels, those 4 novels. And in Miskowski's case, I felt it was more an instance of suddenly realizing, holy cow, this person has really they have this substantial body of work already. It's almost like they snuck up on you, But in Gwendolyn's case and Christie's case, I think it was absolutely the sense of here are these people who are really establishing themselves in this very dramatic way. Victor LaValle's novel, The Changeling, was, I think it's probably the best thing he's written. I'm a big fan of Big Machine, his second novel, but I thought this was maybe even better. And it opens with this absolutely horrifying portrayal of postpartum depression and the way that it tears apart this relationship between this husband and wife, and then goes on from there. That's the first 100 pages, and then there's still about 3/4 of the novel to go, and it just gets progressively stranger, and it moves in really neat directions. I think my favorite, well, actually no, Steve Rasnick Thames novel Ubo maybe takes the cake for the weirdest novel I read last year. It's about a guy who, in the middle of the night, this large insect shows up at the foot of his bed, and it's kind of like a grasshopper, and it's kind of like a cockroach, and it has a sort of a little hook on one of his legs, and it hooks him right through the meat of his hand, right at the base of his thumb, and it drags him off to this other another dimension or another planet, along with all sorts of other people. And they're gathered together, and they're every now and again they're one of them is selected, or a couple of them are selected to go into this room, this chamber, where they're hooked up to this machine that plops them into the consciousness of someone like Jack the Ripper, or what was the Texas Tower guy, Charles Whitman, the sniper. It plops them into his consciousness, and they have no idea why this is happening. So they're just going through these utterly horrifying experiences, and they don't know, are these creatures like studying them? Are they trying to understand them? And it's grim and it's nightmarish, but it's just unlike anything that anyone else is doing.
I was going to say, that is so strange and weird. I am going to have to pick that up. And one of the most frequent comments I get from my audience is that we keep adding to their TBR piles, books that they need to pick up and read. I'm picturing my audience as you're talking, grabbing a pencil and jotting down all these titles.
They're just turning it off. They're just like, the heck with you, Langan.
I can't read all these books.
And I heard that Steve Raznick-Tem has just announced he's got a new collection coming out of, which I think is a big chunk of what he wrote for the last 20 years or something.
I heard that too. That was pretty exciting news.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's this guy who's he's another one of these writers who you look up, and he's been writing for decades, and he's just been so consistent, so good for so long. And he just, he and his late wife, Melanie, wrote a novel called The Man in the Ceiling. That I think it's one of the great horror novels of the last 15 or 20 years. It's such an astonishing book. When I think about it, it still just sort of blows my mind. I think that he kind of flies under the radar a lot of the time. I think Steve Tem. I think he deserves. There's someone who deserves a tribute anthology, but as much as anything, there's someone who deserves to have people go out and buy his books, because he's his own thing. He is his own unique thing, in a way that I would hope to be myself at some point. Like I sort of aspire to being that kind of writer that people will be like, oh, that's Langan. You look at Tem and you're just like, oh, that's Steve Tem. Water.
I think this is the first time I've interviewed you since Autumn Cthulhu came out. And a question I've been wanting to ask you, you had a story called Anchor, a novella, really. All the rest were short stories, and you wrote me a novella. And I love it so much. I loved it as soon as I read it, and I've read it several times since. Can you just talk a little bit about your inspiration for that story?
Sure. It's all Justin Steele's fault.
Everything is.
Well, which, I mean, how often? We've all said that, right? You just, how many times a day do I say, Justin?
Steely J.
Steely J, indeed. He and I, we still do it a little bit, but there was a point in time where I used to sort of Facebook message him a lot. And we were, I want to say we were talking about Jeff Ford. And I was no, you know what it was? Jeff Ford came later. We were talking about monster stories, different kinds of monsters. And he said, I'd really like to see someone write a story about a manticore. And I said, well, Jeff Ford has a story about a manticore. And he said, oh, really? And I can't remember the name of the story off the top of my head, but you should just read all of Jeff Ford's stuff. Just add to that book pile. And I said to Justin, I will write you a manticore story. And then I thought, why did you do that? That's a bad idea. You don't owe anything to Justin. You don't owe anything to that kid. And so I thought I want to do, I want to do that. And then simultaneously, for a number of years when Laird Barron came out east, he came to stay with me and my family. And Paul Tremblay said to me at one point, you should write a kid's book. I said, really? And he said, yeah, it should be a kid's book about like this kid whose dad's friend comes to live with them. And the friend is like this horror writer. And it's not like a creepy book. But it's a little strange and all this. And I thought, I don't really want to write that. But I guess the idea did kind of stick in my head of writing a story from the point of view of a kid whose father has this friendship with this other writer. And yeah, all we
can blame Paul as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's I'd say right behind Justin Steele, it's always a good idea to blame Paul Tremblay. And Stephen King's other son, as I call him. And I just, when it came time to write the story, I thought, man, I would like to write this story. And I had this, the story makes reference to this. I've always loved Richard Adams' novel, Shardik, more so than Watership Down even. It took me, Shardik was one of those big fat novels that I read when I was a kid. And, you know, they take you forever and ever and ever to read when you're a kid, but you just hang in there and the novel goes with you everywhere. And when I read it, I was just kind of blown away by it. And it's sort of, I don't think I've actually reread it all the way through ever since, but it kind of cleared this space in my consciousness that it still occupies. And I love the thought of this giant bear that's also a god, maybe. And so, yeah, all of that came together, all of that kind of coalesced. And so, yeah, in some ways the story became about, or sort of a way of thinking about Laird and me, and how our friendship might seem to my son as he was growing up and will continue to grow up. I mean, obviously it's very, very widely removed from what it was like when he was in the house. There was a lot more crying, for one thing, but yeah, it kind of.
I have no comment on that.
I'm not saying who was crying, you know, but it was. He's a Dallas Cowboys fan. Maybe that's all I need to say. But
is he? So, he's okay then. Laird's okay then.
Cowboys man, he let me tell you, and actually it's funny, this is just as an aside, this didn't make it into the story, but you know, he used to watch, like we would watch Sunday football together, and I never really understood football particularly, and it was actually, for me, it was a lot of fun to watch it with Laird, because number one, Laird loves violence, and he would get really excited when there was a good hit on somebody, you know. But the other thing was that he could explain to me, oh, this is what the pocket is, or this is why this person's trying to do this, and that, you know, that's actually a helpful way to approach something that you don't really understand particularly well. So, but yeah, anyway, so that was kind of how the story grew. And I just liked the idea then of returning to it again and again, you know, returning to this relationship, through the eyes of this narrator, or this protagonist, I should say, returning to that relationship time and time and time again, so that you would see everyone getting older. Basically, you would see this unfolding in time, which I thought was somehow, I thought that was a really kind of a cool idea. Some of my, I guess, favorite novels, and even stories, unfold over a span of years or decades or what have you, and I think that can give you this feeling of almost like a kind of lived experience, you know.
You gave me the story, and you said something in an email like, you know, I wrote you a novella instead of a short story. I understand if you can't take it, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if I can. And then I read it. I thought, this has got to be in the book. It's so beautifully written. You know, I appreciate you writing that story for me.
And I made you wait, like, I think it was like 5 years or something like that. You were just like, every Christmas, you'd be like, any luck on the story? And I'd be like, oh, it's getting there.
Well, I think all the editors are getting used to that from you, John. So.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen Tatlow. Thanks a lot. Ellen delights in telling everybody, oh, John never turns in anything on time, and it's always 50,000 words too long. And just because it's true, she has to say that to everybody.
Michael DeBronzo has a couple of questions. Have you ever, I'm reading here. First question is, has he ever been approached by anyone to adapt any of his stories to film, full-length short stories as part of an anthology, you know, whatever?
I have, but I can't say anything about it.
Okay. Second, if he could pick out one to be adapted as a personal choice, just to see it in the flesh, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. That's an interesting question. You know, I wrote this werewolf story that's in The Wide Carnivorous Sky. It's called The Revel. And it's this, you know, very sort of postmodern kind of deconstruction of the werewolf story and this intrusive narrator and all that sort of stuff. And And I have to admit, I thought you could do a really neat, sort of very deliberately avant-garde film, you know, that took that story and that had it kept breaking the fourth wall, in all sorts of ways. I thought that would be super cool. I don't know that it would be, you know, from a commercial standpoint, I don't know that it would be terribly viable. And I think I wrote a short story about a couple of mercenaries in Paris, dealing with a guy who is not quite what he seems to be. It's called In Paris, in the Mouth of Kronos. It'll be in the new collection when it's out, and I think that that's probably more like movie friendly or even comic book friendly, say, because the narrative is much more straightforward. There's some flashbacks in that, but nothing overly complicated. So those are sort of, I guess that's my sort of two answers: my avant-garde thing, you know, my Tarantino thing, and my other thing.
And that the new collection's about a couple of months or so, right?
Yeah. I'm hoping three to 4 months tops.
Okay. All right. You know, I get different answers to this question when I ask authors and editors, which is probably as it should be. So here's the question: what is weird fiction? You know, if you had to explain that to somebody who's never really heard the term or read weird fiction, what would you say to them?
I think it would depend, honestly, on who I was talking to. So, you know, I might say to the woman or man on the street, you know, it's like that Stephen King kind of stuff, because they have an idea of the kind of stuff that Stephen King writes, and it's, as a shorthand, it's really useful. For anybody who has read more than Stephen King, you know, that's outrageous. How can you say that? But I think to someone like that, I wouldn't say it's that Stephen King stuff. I tend to think of this fiction as it's a fiction that deals with those kind of moments where things fall apart. Those moments where the sense that we make of or try to make of the world or think we've made of the world comes up short or collapses in some way. There's, you know, it's funny. I've been dipping into this collection of essays by the late Joel Lane. I think it's called The Spectacular Darkness or The Spectacular Darkness. Tartarus put it out, but they also put an ebook out, so I could afford to buy it. And Joel Lane was a brilliant short story writer and also a really, really fine critic. And he makes this argument that, like he said, you can think about weird fiction as sort of falling between two poles. And he says at one pole, there's the X-Files, and at the other pole, there's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He says when you're in the Buffy universe, it's all about the characters, right? We love these characters, and we're so invested in them. And there's fear maybe for the safety of the characters or the sanity of the characters or what have you. But fundamentally, we know they're going to come out. We're going to come out of this and we're going to, I don't know, be victorious to a certain extent. And then he says, the other end,
you're going to get that happy ending, Buffy.
Yeah, and then the other end is Scully and Mulder investigating these conspiracies that just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that just often seem to contradict themselves, and we know less when, you know, at the end than we did at the beginning. And Lane makes the argument that most weird fiction, you know, sort of oscillates, is found somewhere in the broad middle, so that, you know, you can look at Thomas Ligotti and say that his work seems to be more at the X-Files end, and you can look at Joe Hill and say his work seems to be more at the Buffy the Vampire Slayer end, and everybody else kind of swings back and forth between those poles. I like that. I think that's a pop culture friendly kind of way to think about what these things do or what the fiction does and some of the areas of concentration that you find within it. I think it was actually Stephen King who said that it's horror fiction is about a sense, a pervasive sense of disestablishment, a feeling that things are in the unmaking. And I love that. I love that as a sort of a blanket definition. And the monsters, the whatever it is, they embody that. They represent that stuff.
Speaking of Thomas Ligotti, I don't know if you guys know this, but he actually wrote an episode of X-Files that never aired.
Yeah, I'd love to read that. Is that going to be published?
I don't know. I can't even remember where I read this, but it was really like in the last 2 weeks I read this somewhere.
Yeah.
And I would love to read that script, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen King scripted an episode that was produced, as I recall, right?
Yeah.
Say that again?
Stephen King scripted an episode that was I'm saying I think that was filmed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the doll one.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. Yeah. John, what is literary success? What is that to you? What does that look like to you?
Oh man, I don't know. It's a kind of a moving target. When I was starting off,
yeah,
I wanted. I just wanted to get published. I wanted to get published. I wanted to be read, and in some ways that's never changed. Like I still want to be read. There's nothing better than when you get that unexpected email or a tweet or Facebook message or whatever from somebody who says, "Hey, I read your book and I really loved it," or "I read your book and I gave it to somebody." That's astonishing. That'll never. The Lovecraft Easy says, "Hey, you want to come on and talk to us?" And I'm like, "What? Me? Really?" That's a crazy thing. That never gets old. I think there have been moments throughout my life, throughout the last few years. I was at the World Horror Convention in 2011, I guess it was, in Austin, and Peter Straub said to me, "So tell me about that House of Windows. Like, where'd you get the idea for that?" I thought, holy cow, this is like one of those I could never have imagined this would happen. I could have dreamed it, but I couldn't have imagined it was really going to happen. So in a way, honestly, I feel like I've already been so fortunate. I've already had a great response to my stuff. I've won awards, which I never thought I would. That just feels like gravy. That just feels like it's all more than I could have expected. Maybe what I could have hoped for. Look, we all have the dream of the big movie deal or something like that. There's no doubt that we all want to be able to make a living writing. So I guess that, but to me, in a way, that's separate from literary success. There were plenty of writers who couldn't make a living writing, and they just had to work their day job and do what they could. So I think, and I think, just to sort of extrapolating a little bit, I guess, if that's a bit of advice, I guess I would pass along to newer writers, is I would say that, there is a difference between that, giant financial success and, the other kind of literary critical success, which may bring with it some money, don't get me wrong, but, that's one of the things I have to tell my creative writing students about, I guess, cycling back to that. Yes, there is a J.K. Rowling and there is a Stephen King and there are people like that, but you need to be really careful about putting all your eggs in that basket and thinking, that's where I'm going. I think that way probably lies heartache and pain. I want to say that the sadly departed Ursula Le Guin said something to that effect, that all you can do is you can write the best book that you can write. That's what you have control over. That a lot of all the rest of it you don't have control over. So write the best book you can write, and if you're putting yourself into that, then hopefully that you'll be able to find satisfaction in that.
Philip, I think you have a question.
Sorry, I'm reading. Yeah, John, I just wanted to talk, and I got to touch on this with Ross after we actually went off the air, but I wanted to ask you if you were caught off. I don't know a better way to put it, but if you were caught off guard with the success of Fisherman, because it being from a smaller independent publisher, it seemed to really, and well deservedly so, it seemed to really blow up. And I hope that it's still continuing to blow up for you. But it's an astonishing book. But I know it was in like the Wall Street Journal did a write up about it, and you can just see how popular it is online with other readers, and anyone who has not read it listening to the podcast should definitely immediately Run, Don't Walk and purchase The Fisherman and read it. But John, I was curious because as part of what we're talking about now is because it was it seems to be and continue to be a very successful book. And I was wondering, if you were caught off guard by it, because I think that's sort of like to have a book kind of come out and be a bit of a phenomenon like The Fisherman.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a shock. I mean, it was really a shock. Obviously, I hoped that it would sell some copies. I hoped that I would earn out my advance. But that was a modest hope. The Wall Street Journal article was pretty astonishing. It got reviewed in the New York Times, which was so completely unexpected, and it got a good review in the New York Times, I should say, which was even more unexpected. But a really kind of insightful review from Terence Rafferty. It was it was a little overwhelming at times, quite honestly. When I opened the I think it was Ross who sent me the Times, a scan of the Times review. I mean, I literally had to hold on to my seat because I thought I was going to fall off of my seat. The same thing was true when it won the Stoker Award, because I really, that category, those were 4 other amazing books, any one of which would have been more than justified in getting that award. I said, oh, it doesn't matter. It's just an honor to be nominated. But of course, I stayed up watching the stream of the ceremony. And then, right as George R.R. Martin and Linda Anderson, I know it was a Tenerife do, are about to announce it, the stream cuts out. And I'm like, Dad, I'm running around the house. And then they got it back on. But then when they said, you want to, I mean, I really felt nauseated. I felt like it was such a powerful kind of moment, and then of course I couldn't sleep. I was and Laird Barron did one of the great things, the great acts of friendship. He called me and just let me babble for about an hour. And this is, midnight or past, but it just kind of let me sort of come down a little bit and just sort of, because otherwise I would have been up most of the night just running around the house, So yeah, the graciousness with which the book has been received is just really astonishing to me and really, really gratifying. I don't think I'll ever stop feeling grateful for that. My wife always believed in the book. My wife was always like, no, that book's going to do really well. And I was like, well, yeah, I hope so. But in this, as in so many other things, she was right.
Well, I think there's a good lesson there for writers who maybe get, because to your point, The Fisherman was rejected a lot by a lot of the big publishers and end up at a very fine indie press, but I would imagine, and then it kind of burst onto the scene. So I think it's probably hopefully a little bit of hope for people who maybe are getting swamped in those rejection postcards or emails, that doesn't mean the product is not a viable product or it's not a great book. It just means that
that is a really important point. And look, when I was a student and a beginning writer, plenty of people said to me, if your stuff gets rejected, don't take it personally. It's not about you. But of course, nobody really believes that. We all nod our heads and we all say, of course, I realize that. But what we see every time we get a rejection, we die inside. And yet it is true that and look, it still sucks. Every now and again, when I get rejected, it still sucks. I'm still like, who do they think they are? How could they? But I also think, oh my God, maybe I'm not that good. Maybe this, which is crazy, right? You would think, you've built up some kind of a track record.
Yeah, we get the little house now. You got to put the little house on your desk so that you can look at it when you start feeling that way. The little Stoker
I
house.
do that all the time. I take it out. My son's like, I'm like, do the dishes. He's like, no. I'm like, have you seen my Stoker award? He's like, Dad, stop it with the award. But yeah, I think that you and look, it's dispiriting. It's absolutely dispiriting when you're sending your stuff out there. And in my 20s, I had a couple of sort of more realistic stories that I shopped around a lot to more to like places like the Ontario Review and the Kenyan Review and that. And man, I accumulated a whole bunch of actually kind of like encouraging rejections, but they were still rejections. I had one story I sent to the Ontario Review, which was the journal that Joyce Carol Oates and her first husband ran. And I got the story back, and it had this gaping hole in the middle of it. And that they had actually taken it and put it like on one of those spikes that you stick bills on or whatever. So not only was the story rejected, but it was like they were trying to kill the story and send its desiccated corpse back to me.
Wow.
So these things happen. But I do believe. I think Ian, when I was at one point I interviewed the Scottish writers Ken MacLeod and Ian Banks for what I thought was going to be a dissertation project. And they said to me, advice for writers, they said, you need to have talent and you need to either have luck or persistence. They said you can have, talent and luck and you'll succeed, talent and persistence and you'll succeed. But you can't just have like luck and persistence. You're not really going to succeed. You need the talent. So persist. Which I know sucks as advice, right? I mean, when I used to ask writers for advice, I wanted the secret. I'd be like, what's your advice for a young writer? And they would say, write. And I'd be like, no, come on. What's the secret advice? That's the secret, is write. Keep at it. Hang in there. And which is not very exciting.
John,
that's the secret to so many things that you want to accomplish in life, dreams. You can stumble along the way, but the worst thing that you can do is quit. You got to never give up.
At 47 years of age, I got my black belt in Tung Soo Do. I would never have believed that was in my future at all. And in my studio, there's a saying: a black belt is just a white belt who didn't quit. And I think that there's some truth to that in all things. That I listened to my younger son who just picked up the guitar in May, and who loves it, and who just that's what he does. He just does it obsessively, and he's getting better at it. So in so many things, you just keep going.
Matt, you had a question.
Well, just on this thread, you've heard of the author Malcolm Gladwell and his book Outlier. His concept is that anybody can become a master. It just takes like 10,000 hours to do it. 10,000 persistent hours practicing your craft. And he says, why do you think so many authors, it seems like they got their big break in their 30s or something like that? And the idea was that they had been writing the whole time in their 20s. It just took them a while to master their craft. So there's a certain amount of skill. But it's the same thing with music. The people who get into the orchestras are the ones who have practiced and practiced and practiced till their fingers bled. So I sort of think about that for authors, and then I think about young writers, and they say it's so difficult, and like, well, you've got to master your craft, and I don't think there's any way to do that.
I don't remember who it was. There's a story about a pianist who gave a concert, and after the concert, a lady came up to him and said how beautifully he played, and she said, "I would give my life to be able to play like that." And his reply was, "I did."
Right.
There's a
yeah, you know.
There's a composer, conductor, music critic named Greenberg. He does a lot of the Great Courses series, and he talks about how these young kids who are like super virtuosos and they get put on the circuit playing kind of rather easier concertos with symphony orchestras, and many of them vanish. And it's because when they get to be a little older, they realize they still have to put in all their hours in the practice room if they want to master.
Right.
You know, and I think like it's no, I guess it's no surprise that it's very difficult first when you start out. How would you compare your writing now to 20 years ago? I mean, I'm not saying it's facile, but it's probably much better. Just because.
Yeah, no, John, I want to say it's John Scalzi, I think, made a comment about that most novelists publish their first novels in their 40s. Or I mean, maybe late 30s, and then that seems to me roughly right. And yeah, you would imagine that in most cases they've been doing it since their teens or even earlier. And it doesn't, I don't know. I suppose it doesn't always, it doesn't when you're a kid, if you love it, it doesn't always seem like a particular, you think, wow, but I love to write. I wasn't working. Yes, you were. You know, I grew up with a younger brother who's a doctor now, and he was first in the class. I was a couple of years younger than I am. I love him to death. But I grew up thinking for years that he was the studious one. He was the one who had really, you know, addressed himself to education and, you know, his own education and development, whatever. And it was only when I was in my, I don't know, you know, mid-30s or something that I realized, started to publish a little bit, that it suddenly occurred to me I had spent all of my childhood doing the same thing, but just in a different way. I had been reading, I had been writing, I had been drawing comic books, or, you know, I'd been learning about narrative. But because it was so much fun and because it wasn't in a school setting, I never thought about it. You know, I didn't get graded on it. I didn't get A's on my stories or whatever. So it just seemed like some kind of frivolous entertainment, when in fact it was tremendous, tremendous discipline and tremendous work. And so I think that is really important to remember, that you have to put in the time. If you don't want to put in the time, that's totally fine. That's you don't have, you know, like you don't have to be a writer. You don't have to be a musician. You don't have to be in any of this kind of stuff. But if you do want to do it, develop some patience, because you're going to be at it for a while.
Now, one other thing I'd like to know, like, what's next? I mean, we're all wondering, like, what are you working on now? What are we going to see next?
Well, hopefully this new collection comes out. I just turned in I just turned in about a 26,000 word novella to Ellen Datlow for her Ghost anthology, which is coming out, I think, man, I want to say in the fall, like maybe September. I think it's called Echoes, the Saga Book of Ghost Stories or something like that. And for once, Ellen said to me, I need you to write me something long, because she'd had a couple of people she thought were going to give her stories, and then it didn't work out for them. And so she was like, all right. And I have another story actually coming out with her. I have a much shorter story, a sea story, coming out in an anthology of sea horror stories called something like The Devil in the Deep or something, which I think will be out in the spring, maybe June or thereabouts. So those will be appearing. Hopefully the new book will be appearing. I've got a couple of things that are a couple of other things that are forthcoming, but that they haven't been officially announced yet. So I feel that at the moment I should probably talk about a vague booking, right? I hate that, but I'm hoping to get a novella finished, another novella finished, for something in the next few months, and I need to get on to the next novel. That's I really I have an idea for the next couple of novels actually, and I just need to get to them. So and reviews, more reviews for Locus as well.
Pete, did you have a question as well a little bit ago?
Yeah, so the story you sent to the Ontario Review that was rejected. Did you ever?
What about it?
Did you ever place it?
No, I don't even know if I have it anymore. It's sort of funny. I think it was called Roadkill, as I recall. Yeah, I had some stories in my 20s. I tried to write like I guess you say more literary or self-consciously literary kinds of stories, sort of like Raymond Carver-esque kind of stuff, and they weren't very good. I think in a lot of cases they were dealing with a lot of the material that the same material that my horror stories would deal with, but in this, they weren't really engaging it. They were dealing with that material in an oblique kind of way. So they were, they're. I think I probably still have some of them out in the garage somewhere, but I think that's probably where they should stay.
John, I know we need to wrap up soon, but what draws you to weird fiction and horror?
Oh, I love it. I mean, there's almost like nothing. I like to read a lot of stuff, and I lots of stuff delights me, but nothing delights me as consistently as horror and weird fiction does. I love that. I love the way in which the kind of the mundane and the fantastic just crash up against one another. So there's that just that never gets old for me. That way that whether it's King or it's Straub or it's Ted Klein or more recently people like Laird Barron or S.P. Miskowski. There's it's just endlessly fascinating to me. Endlessly, not only fascinating, really interesting, like deeply interesting. I connect with it on this deep level, and I think that it speaks. I think in general, honestly, I think it does kind of speak to our kind of common experience. We all have those moments where the bottom drops out from underneath us. We think. We're going along. When I was 13, my dad had these 2 heart attacks. One put him in the hospital, and the other one he had while he was in the hospital. And the heart attack the first heart attack was sort of the widowmaker. 9 out of 10 people die from it. And he was a lifelong smoker. It wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't a huge surprise, right? But at the moment, it just felt like everything had fallen out. He was in the hospital. My mom didn't drive. We lived in a kind of remote location. All of a sudden, things just plummeted from underneath me, and that happens to all of us, I think, in ways small. I mean, how did we all feel the morning of September 11th when 2001 when we woke up and it was like, or if we hadn't turned on the TV, somebody called us and said, "Oh my God, you better turn on the TV." So I recognize that in whether it's that personal story or whether it's that national story, there is an explanation. These things don't come out of nowhere. There is a context for it. But that said, the way that we experience them is as this tremendous disruption, this tremendous way in which everything is just shattered. It doesn't really make sense. And I think that horror fiction, weird fiction, I think really embraces that and tries to explore that and work in that space of uncertainty. And that to me is just endlessly compelling.
how can people connect with you online? You have a website, correct?
Yeah. It's if you look up Mr. Gaunt, the website for John Langan, it's basically just my WordPress, like my blog. So you can go there. You can find me on Facebook, where I spend far too much time. You can find me on Twitter. I'm there. I mostly just retweet other people's stuff. I now apparently am on Instagram as well. And God knows what's next in my online future. But yeah, come and say hi.
So yeah, to the audience, if you haven't read The Fisherman, you really need to pick up that book. John's other novel, House of Windows, has just been re-released. And then I'm sorry, the name of your first collection just escaped me.
It's Mr. Gaunt's Other Uneasy Encounters. That one is it's probably technically out of print. I think there were still copies that are floating around. My most recent collection, The White Carnivorous Sky, is you can go to Hippocampus Press or Amazon and you can get it there.
Okay. Well, thanks, John, for talking with me. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on, guys. I was saying to Mike the other day, this is like one of the highlights of my week. This is just something I look forward to every week, is seeing you guys get together and make fun of each other. And
wait, you watch us? You watch us do this?
Absolutely. I watch you guys. I'm just kind of like, yeah, here we go. Right. What are they going to say about Rawlick this week? Oh, that was good.
You like me. You really like me.
Yeah. No, I've got I have little cutouts of all of your heads, and I just it's like a horse race. I just advance them back and forth to see who's ahead, But no, I love you guys. I love the fact that it's this like community, both like you guys, but then the sort of larger online community. I think that's such a great thing. I really am. I'm happy to be here and to be part of it. But I'm just happy that it continues beyond each and every week. Aside from the whole unpleasantness with Ross, I mean, who could have seen that coming?
Yeah, talk about your Lovecraftian catastrophe. So
well,
we will speak of it no more.
Right.
Wait.
What?
That's a rock opera. The Lovecraftian catastrophe,
okay.
by Dr. Goldtooth and the Electric Mayhem.
If you want to see John in the flesh, you got to go to Boscone next, right?
That's right. Yeah. I'll be at Boscone in a couple of weeks, which it's a smaller convention, Northeast Science Fiction Association. It has a sort of small but dedicated horror contingent, and I go there to hang out with Paul Tremblay and Jack Haringa, and Bracken McLeod is there. So there's a few horror folks who show up, and Chris Golden shows up sometimes. So I recommend it. It's a kind of convention where you'll see people sometimes wearing full suits of armor, and I know that makes some people cringe. I love it. I think that's terrific. Years ago, they had a local armory come, and they had a European sword fighting club. And so I took a lesson in medieval, probably I think it was 15th century German sword fighting. So good stuff.
Well, John, I have to tell you that you made my day when you told me last night that you watch or listen to the show every week. So thank you for that.
No, thank you for doing this. The commitment you guys have to this, it borders on the maniacal.
Well,
my doctor says it's therapy, and I can make it tax deductible.
Oh, that explains.
Really? So let's take a minute and talk about Philip Fracassi. Yeah. You're going to want to unmute that button there.
Not again. Again?
More?
Again. Yeah. Philip, you've got a book called novella called Shiloh, and it was published by, remind me,
Mount Abraxas.
Right, and very few copies. How many copies were there?
Sorry, I was grabbing a visual. That's the fine press
Right.
edition.
And how many copies were there?
100, and I think they're gone. I think.
Yeah, they were very expensive. I didn't want to announce this until the copies were gone, but I'm going to republish this so that more people can read this novella. So it'll be available, I'm thinking, in a couple of months. It'll be available in print and Kindle. Philip, take a minute and talk about what this book is about, because it's a very interesting theme.
Yeah, and first I should say that I'm excited to be doing this with you, Mike, and your press, and the response and the story for those who have had a chance to read it has been really strong. So I'm excited about what it will do in a trade edition that people can afford. So the story of Shiloh is literally about the Battle of Shiloh in the American Civil War. It's two twin brothers who fight for the Confederate side. It takes place over the 2 days of the battle. Starts at the point where the South is about to bum rush a Union camp, and the story takes place over the next 48 hours. So there was actually, it's based on fact, and it's kind of a weird, it's almost like a Charles Fort kind of deal, but apparently during the battle there are records of there being this kind of weird luminescent green glow that began to attach itself to the wounded soldiers, and the soldiers were also miraculously, who were infected with this weird glow, were actually healing faster than normal soldiers who were injured, and it kind of got, and then, like, about, I think a few years ago, some kids were doing a science experiment. They came to the conclusion that it was a bacteria that was carried on insects, and the insects would go to the wounds and eat people, and then they'd carry this bacteria, and the bacteria would have a healing quality. So I basically took that premise, along with the horror of the battle, which was one of the most horrific battles of the Civil War, and kind of combined it into a horror story. So it's around novella, it's pushing novella length, and it's pretty relentless, and it's pretty it's a lot of intense battle sequences, and it's a lot of intense supernatural element that gets thrown in as well. So I'm really excited to be doing it with Easing and Press, and I think people are really going to get a kick out of it. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's a great story. And Philip, you haven't seen this yet. I've seen a preview of the new cover. I think you're really going to like it. So,
are you going to show it right now? Is it a cover reveal?
No, it's not done.
I got all excited.
It was well, just basically, she told me this is how it's going to look. She kind of gave me a little preview, and it looks great. I think it fits really well.
Yeah, so. Great. That's great. Yeah, I'm excited, and yeah, it's been a really good, I guess I say, year. It's been a great month. So between this one, I've got 2 other fairly big announcements that I'll be able to make in the next week or 2 with some other presses for some other stuff that's coming out. So yeah, so far 2018 has been a lot of fun.
Well, before we go, what about the rest of you guys? Pete, what are you guys working on right now?
Pete has overcome the malaise that has infected him for the last year, and is now frantically working on the novel. Frantically. Like, I did 3,225 words today.
Wow.
So,
wow. Jesus.
Yeah. My ass hurts. So.
You need to know that.
It had nothing to do with the writing, but
no, I you know how they say sit your butt in the chair and write? I sat my butt in the chair and I wrote, but I paid for it.
Okay. I'm doing something I'm watching River.
I don't know where
I'm thinking about watching Riverdale.
It's gotten worse and worse with each successive episode. The first, it's like a soap opera with the Archie characters and 20-some-year-olds playing teenagers, and it's got a relentlessly angry note to it. But the reason I'm watching it is there are Lovecraftian hints. Okay? So the Jughead and Archie characters have to carry a package from one end of Riverdale to another, and when they drop it off, it says, from Miskatonic University, care of HPL. I'll post a picture of the box on the eZine webpage. And then another scene, like an episode or two later, Jughead's typing a story, and he says, well, this has certain Lovecraftian overtones. You know, so they actually mention Lovecraft's name. And Pete has this theory that they're going to turn this into Afterlife with Archie next season, which has also been discussed on Vanity Fair. But right now, I got to say, the show is torture. And I'm just doing it and telling you this, so you know you've heard the only two things that really would make it worth watching.
Matt is watching it so that we don't have to.
Yeah. So there's actually two. There's actually two directions you can go. There can go the Afterlife is Archie or the Sabrina Bride of Cthulhu vein. Either one of those directions is valid and based on the comic books that came out in the last couple of years.
There's nothing valid about this show.
Where's the
really
show?
Reached a low point in this show.
Yeah.
Is this a Netflix show?
No, it's a CW show, whatever that is.
But it is on, the first season is on Netflix, I believe.
Yes, no Lovecraftian anything in that one.
Is it like a Dawson's Creek, or is it scary, or what is it?
It's a dark Dawson's Creek, I suppose. It's got some elements of Twin Peaks in it. It's a small town drama thriller type elements.
You watch it?
I do watch it. In fact, in the last episode, there was another Lovecraft name drop.
Oh, I haven't seen that. What was it?
Jughead had handed the thing he was writing to somebody else, and she read, it does have some Lovecraftian overtones, but I'm guessing that you meant that. And I thought, I hope this is not the entire thing that he's been writing this whole time, because she obviously has never read a Lovecraft story then.
All right, so here's the question. Is it worth watching? Because I have a hard time getting through all the teen angst. I couldn't get through the first episode of Runaways.
Well, I would say no, except I want to say hell no.
It really straddles the line between bad and ultra bad.
Yeah.
If you're having trouble with the teen elements in Runaways, then this will break your brain. It's very melodramatic teen stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll wait on reports from Matt. And you, if you continue watching it.
Oh, I'll continue watching it. It's good, trashy fun, but it is not good film making or television or anything like that.
Well, I broke down and I watched The Vault today.
The Vault.
The Vault.
What is The Vault?
That's a good question. It starts off as a bank robbery and ends up as a haunting. With a serial killer. But, I'm still trying to figure it out. It's a James Franco movie. It's on Netflix. It's instant. I thought there was some really good scenes in there, and then there's some really bad stuff. So, and nothing Lovecraftian. So you don't have to watch it, Mike.
Okay. Kelly is right. You need to get headphones. We're echoing in you. Yeah, Dr. Sleep. You want to talk about that real quick?
It was just announced that Mike Flanagan, who did Gerald's Game most recently, the Stephen King adaptation of Gerald's Game, which is on Netflix, just announced that he is also going to be directing the Stephen King novel Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. So I thought that was it sounds like Flanagan's got the inroad on King stuff. King tends to work with directors he likes. A lot of his TV adaptations are all Mick Garris, is that his name? The same guy. And he just works with the same guys again and again and again. And then he lets a few go out to the studios and they screw that up there on their own time. But so yeah, interesting to see that Flanagan's getting into the King, doing more King. I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know if it's going to be for TV or if it's going to be a theatrical release.
Here's where things get a little weird. Is this going to be a sequel? Is it going to be a direct adaptation of the novel, which won't fit in as a sequel to the film The Shining, since that's so different from the novel it's based on? But it's not going to make much sense to do Dr. Sleep on its own.
Well, the reality, at least for me, when I read Dr. Sleep, aside from the fact that the same character, it's Danny now fully, as an adult, I don't really get the sequel elements other than it's the same character, because the storyline really has absolutely nothing at all to do with The Shining.
That's a good point. Yeah, I imagine that. I mean, everything that is in the novel that relates to The Shining is all in Danny's head anyway. It'd be impossible to show on film. So
I don't know. Don't you think this would be a chance for like a Netflix series or something like that? As like an 8-episode adaptation of The Shining, and then do Dr. Sleep?
I don't know. Here's the real question. Was he given a list of stories that are available for him to adapt? Because this is an odd choice to me. I don't think this is a very strong novel in the first place.
Yeah, I know that I read it years and years and years ago, but I can't remember a thing about it.
He's an alcoholic. There's a band of gypsies that I think are going around taking people's like life energy, like they're like life energy vampires. Is that right, Kelly?
Yeah.
And one girl's got like a top hat. It's pretty.
Glad to see that you took a lot out of this book.
It's pretty. Well, it was kind of a look. Let's call a spade a spade. It was kind of a ripoff. Everybody's like, "Oh my god, it's a Shining sequel! It's a Shining sequel! Oh my god, let's all run to the bookstore," and you get it, and you're like, "This isn't a Shining sequel. It's just a different story with this Danny thrown in as the main character."
Right.
He refers to what happened to him at the Overlook Hotel, I think in the first chapter, where he goes and there's a scene with the cook, who's now old, super old and stuff. But the rest of the story is there's nothing at all to do with. It could have been anybody. It could have been me as the main character, because I'm an alcoholic and I could have done it. But
that's true.
But they chose to make. So I thought it was kind of a ripoff. It wasn't really a Shining sequel. It was just another story with the Danny character as an adult. So, and it's not a strong novel. But then again, people have done more with less.
Well, I'm rereading Dracula. I'm in the middle of it.
They should make Dracula into a movie.
What a great idea! Yeah, that would work. I have a bad habit of reading like 4 or 5 books at once. So, and I'm actually reading a Dean Koontz book. Don't judge me.
I picked it up and started reading Koontz books I like quite a bit, actually. What era Koontz are you reading?
2011.
Ugh, never mind.
Which one is it?
Yeah, 77 Shadow Street. Kind of a soft spot for it's about this. Yeah, it's a really, I guess, nice apartment building, and it's got a history and weird things happen. I kind of got a soft spot for, closed, what do you want to say, ecosystem stories like that. Join it. So, well, John, thank you again so much for being on the show today. It was really great to talk with you.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Anytime. I'm happy to come back.
That sounds great.
See you next week.
Yep.
Yeah,
thanks, everybody.
Take my spot?
What's that? What was that?
We're all bailing on you. It's just going to be you and John Langan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about all of you guys. So there.
Yeah, that works. All right. Well, thanks again, John. Thanks, guys. And we will see everybody next week. Thanks.